The one pillar that I emphasize the most, of course, is what I call the pillar of meritocracy, because I think it really explains why Asia is taking off. Now, what do I mean by meritocracy? Now, to explain meritocracy, I use the example of Brazil. And I ask the question, why is Brazil a soccer superpower, right? Winning World Cup so consistently, and in economic terms, only a middle power? And the simple answer is that when it comes to looking for soccer talent, Brazil goes everywhere. It goes to the upper class, middle class, lower class, and they go into the slums. And if they find a boy who can kick a ball well, they say, come and play for Brazil. They don't care what class you belong to, they pull you in and they make you a member of the national soccer team. But when it comes to looking for talent in the economic sector, they go to the upper class, the middle class, and maybe some in the lower classes, but they don't go into the slums. So the pool of talent from which they're looking to compete economically is much smaller. Now, the really big news in Asia is that Asia always had these hundreds of millions of brains which were essentially not used. And now these brains which were not used are coming on into the mainstream. And you can imagine the impact you have on the societies when all kinds of new brains come and are used in a brilliant fashion. The example I tell in my book is of a man who was born in the untouchable caste in India. You know, I'm ethnically Indian, some of you would know. And in India traditionally, for centuries, birth was destiny. If you were born in the untouchable caste, you lived your life in the untouchable caste, and you died in the untouchable caste. But this young boy went to school, and when he walked in a classroom, he couldn't sit with the other school children because he was untouchable. He couldn't eat with the other school children because he was untouchable. But he persevered, went on, studied, did well, got scholarships, came to Columbia University, got a PhD, and today he's the chief economist of the Reserve Bank of India. And the Prime Minister of India said, and I quote him, "This case of Narendra Yadav represents an enormous silent revolution taking place in India." Suddenly, all these talent and brains that were never used are being used. And so if you can imagine that, hundreds of millions of brains sparking, then you can realize, hey, this is a new terrain of world history that we're entering. And the really good news, and I emphasize this especially when I speak to a Western audience, this sort of what I describe as a march to modernity that really began initially with Japan, went from Japan to the Four Tigers, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, went to Southeast Asia. From Southeast Asia, it went to China, and after China, India also is now, the march to modernity has gone into India. And from India, it's now poised to enter the Islamic world. And believe me, the single biggest reason why the West should cheer the rise of Asia, should cheer the return of China and India, is because this is now the new model for the young Islamic minds. Because they say, maybe that's what we can do. We too can create a modern middle-class society in these Islamic societies. And it's happening, by the way. I have spoken to young Muslims when I go to Pakistan, when I go to the Gulf region, and they look at China and they look at India and they say, why not us? And that would be a wonderfully happy world if that can happen.